Words cannot begin to describe the sheer amount of rage I have felt in the process of researching, writing, and now recording this video. Not only were multiple trans children and those who protected them arrested, a terrifying prospect for anyone, but the police continued to enact violence, slamming their victims into doorways and denying them basic utilities such as toilet paper, clean water to wash their hands, and even heart medications. Keep in mind that some of their victims were detained for more than 9 hours. Now, this is based on testimony by one of the police's 17-year-old victims, and I imagine the bootsuckers will be quick to deny said accusations, except we have video evidence of those very same officers engaging in very clear police brutality against the adults who rushed to try and save said children. This is the injustice system we have in the UK. But before we get to that, a quick content warning for the following: transmisia, child abuse, video of police brutality, medical violence, and suicide. If our work has helped you, please consider supporting us via Patreon so I can keep the channel running. You can also help us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. I'd also just like to take the time to remind our viewers that the statements made throughout our videos are the opinions of myself, the host, based on the evidence I have available to me. They are not and should not be taken as unquestionable fact, which is why we reference everything, because we're fallible. Thus we try to give you, the viewer, the ability to check all evidence yourself in order to make up your own mind, which is what the reference numbers in the top left corner are for, being numbers that match up with the reference list found in the transcript linked down below. As such, we encourage all viewers to do their own research to reach an informed conclusion about the topic. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and we need to talk about Glasgow police brutalising multiple trans children, people who try to rescue them, and the violence enacted by the police after the arrest, so once the children were handcuffed and in their control. Today's video is about Trans Kids Deserve Better, or TKDB, a group of trans kids who have been forced to take up protesting after the UK banned life-saving healthcare under the NHS. We did a timeline of TKDB's early actions in our video, Trans Kids Fight Back Against Inhuman Puberty Blocker Ban, and then a follow-up in our last video, Labour refuses to publish report on trans child deaths. Do check those videos out if you'd like to know more about their political action. They're both fully referenced, as always. So let's start at the beginning. On the 26th of May 2025, Trans Kids Deserve Better staged 2 simultaneous protests, one up in Glasgow, Scotland, and another down in London, England. Both protests took place outside the EHRC offices in response to the EHRC's horrific guidance following the Supreme Court ruling. And whilst the London protest went without much incident, though the police did turn up and monitor said children, the same cannot be said about the protest up in Glasgow. As TKDB explained in their official statement, quote, "I will not have a courtroom or any government define my gender identity or the bathroom I use. We should be free to study for exams, but we can't do that because we're too busy fighting for our lives. We deserve a life, so give us one." A group of Scottish trans youth took to occupying the balcony above the entrance to the EHRC, Equality and Human Rights Commission building, at 40 West Street, Glasgow. The occupation is in protest to the interim guidance published by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, EHRC, which support the recent Supreme Court ruling on the biological definitions and their use in law. The group were seen flying a banner which reads, "End segregation, trans liberation," as a direct response to the EHRC statements which seek to further alienate trans people from groups or spaces that they would have otherwise have been allowed to exist in. An activist participating said, "It is disappointing that we have to undertake an action such as this to be listened to, but as long as we are ignored and oppressed, we will keep fighting. Within the past months, there have been several protests at the EHRC headquarters in Glasgow, but the occupation by TKDB Scotland has been the only sustained action which hopes to show the anger and betrayal felt by the Scottish trans community by holding a permanent presence over their officers for the work week. Alongside the Scotland group, TKDB England have also started an occupation outside the EHRC offices in London. Equipped with flags, banners and instruments to lead a series of chants emphasizing their presence, the teenage activists are calling on their comrades and allies to show up and make some noise in support. They're showing the EHRC that they won't let their guidance dictate where they're allowed to exist in a very literal sense. The young activists are determined to get their rage, anger and sorrow out, and this action is a way to do it. Trans kids deserve to have a right to education without worry of being segregated because of their identity, so change that, go to the protest and be vocal about your anger because trans kids deserve better. Action takers were arrested and held for up to 9 hours, but are now all safely released. 2 supporters were also arrested, with one being held for a court hearing tomorrow." End quote. To be clear, it was 3 members of TKDB who were arrested, with each one being under the age of 18 according to Pink News, meaning that they're legally considered minors. This is a terrible thing. To arrest 3 children for protesting EHRC guidance that would, if made law, exclude them from spaces in line with their gender is horrific. It's a reminder how, in the UK, we no longer have the right to protest. We of course saw this last year with the 5 Just Stop Oil protesters who were each sentenced 4 to 5 years for simply planning a protest. So not even going ahead with it, just planning. Yet again, this is quite literally children being arrested for protesting in defense of their rights. As they stated, they shouldn't be doing this. They should be worrying about their exams, but they've been forced to fight for their lives. Now, a likely reason for why one group was arrested and the other wasn't is because of the crowd who turned up in support of them. A lot more people, myself included, were paying attention to the protest in London and didn't even realise that there was one happening in Glasgow at the same time. One thing TKDB always asks for is adults to turn up to support them, even if it's just acting as a barrier between them and violent thugs, including the police. That's actually one of the reasons Pride exists, as a place where LGBT+ people can protest en masse with a reduced risk of police violence through safety in numbers. Though that's not to say nobody turned up to support the Glasgow group. As noted in the TKDB statement, 2 other people, one aged 32 and another 18, were arrested for trying to protect their children, with a third, aged 25, being arrested later. Fact is, we have one of those arrests on film, taken when a group of human rights protesters stopped a police van at a crossing, demanding that they let the 3 children go, with one person even screaming, "They're just kids," at one point. So we see police make repeated attempts to clear protesters, whilst the protesters do the best they can to stop the van, keeping in mind their small numbers. Eventually the police get frustrated, grab one of the protesters, who seems to be holding a drink, slamming them into another officer, spilling said drink. The second officer then lunges at the person the other officer had shoved into him, and the two officers then tackle said person to the ground, seemingly on the basis that being shoved by one officer into another officer, resulting in a spilled drink, constitutes assault on an officer. Just a completely manufactured situation by police to justify further brutality against someone who, again, is trying to save a group of children. And I do mean save, keeping in mind that both bigotry and sexual violence are staples of the UK police force, being partaken in by the vast majority of them, whilst the remaining few who don't personally engage in such behaviour enable it by either covering for said violence or ignoring it in their reports. This really came to light following the police rape and murder of Sarah Everard, and the various rape chats between numerous officers were leaked. There was also the brutalization of the women who held a vigil for Sarah, how said women were pinned to the ground by police officers before being dragged off into the dark of night, screaming. But bringing things back to the LGBT+ community, the UK Transport Police announced its intent to force trans women to be searched by male officers the day after the Supreme Court ruling that excluded trans people from the legal definition of their gender, so trans women from the legal definition of a woman and trans men from the legal definition of a man. They did this before any guidance had been issued. That's how excited they were to subject trans people to additional violence for being trans. Then, just at the end of May, police forcibly removed gay rights activist and hero Peter Thatchell from Birmingham Pride, claiming his invite by the organisers had been rescinded and that he and his group would be arrested if they did not leave. This turned out to be a lie. The organisers made no such demand. Now, why did the police target Peter and lie about said fact? It's because Peter was leading a group actively seeking justice for LGBT+ victims of police violence, demands that hurt the egos of said officers, hence they forced him out of Pride via the threat of violence. I plan to do a video unpacking this particular case in further detail, as it's a case that deserves extra attention. Going back a bit, we had the months of lies surrounding the murder of 16-year-old Brianna Jai, with police claiming that there was no proof that said murder had been hate motivated, only for numerous family and friends to come forward about the facts that Brianna and her family had reported multiple instances of transmisic assault to both the school and police in the months leading up to her murder, yet both institutions failed to move to protect her. I want to be clear, I personally hold the UK police responsible for said murder, as stated by me as this information was coming to light. These and many similar cases are why 88% of trans youth in Scotland, ages 13 to 25, don't feel safe or confident enough to report an anti-trans hate crime to the police, according to a 2024 report by LGBT Youth Scotland. There is a deep-rooted reason for that fear and mistrust. So those children were at an immediate risk in that situation, and I just wish there'd been more people to force them to be released, especially as one of the children has since come forward about police violence after his arrest, as we'll see in a minute. Yet, the last thing I want to comment on here is the National's sickening framing of the assault we just saw, posting said video under the heading, quote, "Clashes between pro-trans protesters and Police Scotland in Glasgow's West George Street amid attempts to stop a police van removing other activists." End quote. No mention of the fact that the other activists were children, in spite of that being audible in the video itself. Just wanted to point out that omission whilst going on record, telling whoever is working at the National to go fuck themselves. Which brings us to the fact that one of the children, 17-year-old Ripley, has come forward and given an interview to Days Digital about what the police did to them and the rest of the children during and after their arrest. I just want to read out some highlights that I've taken, starting with the arrest itself and how, quote, "The activist managed to stay on the balcony for around 2 hours before police officers opened the window from inside the building and began dragging them inside. According to Ripley, one of his fellow activists hit their head on the way in. At no point during their subsequent detention were they checked for head injuries, whilst he himself injured his shoulder. After informing the arresting officer of this, he says they made sure he banged his shoulder on every door frame on the way down to the street. Police Scotland declined to comment on this allegation or any other." End quote. So, firstly, they injured said children during the arrest and failed to follow up with any proper medical checkup after they were explicitly told. Again, the 3 arrested on the balcony were all legally considered minors. Now, I know police have a responsibility to check everyone for injury as a bare fucking minimum, but the level of neglect on display here, particularly for a head injury, is just horrific. That alone should be enough to cost all officers involved their jobs, bare minimum. I personally believe that said negligence should amount to criminal action. I have a zero fucking tolerance policy for law enforcement failing to protect the public. Their training is funded by the taxpayer, they're supposedly taught proper protocol, they don't get to make excuses, especially not when children are involved. And that's before we even get to the fact that the police repeatedly slammed Ripley's shoulder on every door frame after he'd alerted police to his injury. This was sheer spite, aggression that completely vindicates every trans person who's ever felt too afraid to report violence or seek out support because they're afraid police might become involved. Though, again, this was targeted at a child. This is police brutality, plain and simple. There is absolutely zero doubt in my mind that the police did this, considering what those very same officers chose to do on camera. If they're willing to fabricate a reason to justify violently assaulting someone, as we all saw they are, they're absolutely the sort of person who would use their position of power to hurt a trans child in their custody. Because, again, they did this after said child was arrested. This wasn't people thrashed around during the arrest. Said brutality was carried out in a situation in which the police force and their officers had complete control over Ripley and the situation. There is no fucking excuse here. Moving on, the article adds that, quote, "A crowd had gathered outside to show support, at one point attempting to stop a van which contained one of the activists from departing. Footage taken at the scene suggests a heavy-handed police response. Ripley was charged with breach of the peace, taken to a nearby police station and processed quickly, but had to wait 6 hours in the pouring rain for his fellow activist to be released. My friends told me that they were left without loo roll, left without water to wash their hands. One of the activists on the ledge was denied 2 doses of heart medication, he says." End quote. I do think Suggest is doing a lot of heavy lifting here to downplay just how clear the video was. The police didn't like the fact that people challenged their arrest of 3 trans children, so they decided to send the trans community a message showing us what they intend to do to anyone who resists their gang violence. Yet, perhaps even more telling is the fact that said children were left without basic utilities such as loo roll, water to wash their hands, and one person was even denied 2 doses of their heart medication. That could have been lethal, and we're fucking lucky that a trans child didn't die as a result, especially considering that some of them were detained for 9 hours. The first 2 are more dehumanizing, compounding on the violence enacted by the EHRC, which is all about stripping trans people of their humanity by denying them their gender, and to be clear, those alone should be enough to charge police of criminal negligence, in my personal opinion. The last instance, however, we're looking at attempted murder in my eyes. If someone has heart medication and you choose to deny them that is you consciously orchestrating the situation that is likely to result in their death. I'm just glad the police failed in their objective. We also see that at least one of the children, Ripley, was charged with breach of the peace, again echoing the tactics used against Just Stop Oil. Now, there's a lot more to the article, so do check it out, but I'll just end this chapter by discussing the last 3 paragraphs, which state, quote, "Considering what they're up against, it's amazing that trans kids deserve better are capable of any positivity at all. This is a group of very young people taking on a powerful, influential, and well-funded political movement. What the EHRC is doing is blatantly harmful, and it goes against their core principles as the defenders of the rights of people," Blue thinks. She continues to give her opinion that they've not actually listened to us, they've not considered the harm they'll be doing with their actions because they're in the pockets of pressure groups like Sex Matters and the LGBT Alliance who want to erase us completely from public life. We are here taking a stand against our erasure. However successful the anti-trans lobby has been, the transphobia it represents is not a mainstream opinion, as Blue and Goose have discovered while leafleting and engaging with the public. These groups have a disproportionate amount of influence, but they're small, says Goose. As soon as people start speaking out, that's when they lose their influence. We need to prove they're not the majority. But it will take more than posting memes to turn the tide. People, mainly cis people, but also other trans, masc and AFAB non-binary people, need to be going on marches, supporting demos, and donating to trans women's fundraisers, adds Goose. Protect the dolls is an empty statement if you don't actually do anything. Trans kids deserve better's courage, determination, and ingenuity should be an inspiration to everyone. End quote. TKDB needs people on the ground, especially up in Scotland right now. So if you're around the Glasgow area or can travel, please consider giving some of your time to protect these children as they go forward. I'm redoubling my efforts to track their actions to keep you all up to date on their progress. But bringing this back to the police force, not only do we have multiple examples of police brutality, the denial of safe water and sanitation, and even one attempt at murder by police, but these actions have completely undermined the pledge of the current Chief Constable of Police Scotland, Joe Farrell. Whilst researching this video, I came across her 2024 apology to the LGBT+ community, which the police force summarised as, quote, "Chief Constable Joe Farrell has apologised to the LGBTQI+ communities of Scotland for the pain caused through injuries, including policing's role in enforcing laws which criminalised love and identity." End quote. Reading Farrell's own words, she asserts that, quote, "I believe passionately in the value that policing brings to our communities. keeping people safe from harm, protecting the vulnerable, bringing criminals to justice, solving problems, and reducing offending. We stand up for and with our communities, which strengthens them, improves their well-being, and allows them to prosper. The value must be for all our communities. Everyone must know that when policing talks about keeping people safe, that applies to them. All must feel able to speak to the police, to report a crime, or to share information knowing they'll be treated with dignity and respect. I also want people from all communities to see policing as a potential career. It is a matter of deep regret that these values, over a period of decades, have not always applied to the LGBTQI+ communities of Scotland. As Chief Constable, I would like to extend a sincere apology for the recent and historical injustices and discrimination that members of LGBTQI+ communities in Scotland have faced. At times, policing has not only failed to protect you, but has contributed to the mistreatment and prejudice many have endured. Laws which criminalize love and identity were wrong, and policing must recognize and reflect upon our role in enforcing them. I am truly sorry for the serious and long-lasting physical and mental pain and harm caused, both to my internal colleagues and to our communities. Police Scotland is determined to build an inclusive service, free from discrimination for all communities. We will advocate for and support third-party reporting to increase confidence and overall reporting. We are empowering leaders to build inclusive teams, improving our education and training for all our officers and staff to ensure they understand and respect the issues facing the LGBTQI+ communities and equality laws, focusing on our values and standards, and delivering a clear and consistent message that there is no place in Police Scotland for prejudice. And we will reintroduce specialist liaison officers to work with the community and support officers and staff. It is important that we take responsibility for our actions to build a future where everyone feels safe and supported. I am dedicated to building a service that you can trust, one that is inclusive, respects diversity, and promotes the rights and dignity of all individuals. I hope this apology can contribute to the necessary progress to ensure the value of policing is for all communities." End quote. None of this means anything after what her officers did on the 26th of May. It's hollow words designed to make her and her police force look good, whilst they brutalize our children and then wonder why the fuck we don't reach out to them about anti-trans hate crimes. Because it is always framed as the trans community needing to be taught that they can go to police, chuck another fucking liaison officer onto the pile to mine for information that can be weaponized against the community later. That'll sort out those uppity queers. I am very much of the opinion that the UK police can never be fixed. Sociology has been openly discussing the canteen culture in the UK police since the 80s, how any good that might exist in a new recruit is beaten out of them, or they're beaten out of the police force, meaning the only ones who stay and thus get promoted are violent bigots, or those who enable them. Thus the rot goes all the way to the top. For the police to even begin to put things right, Jo Farrell needs to resign immediately for her failure to uphold her promises to the LGBT+ community, and every officer involved in this case, including arrest, protesting and detainment, need to be put on public trial for their crimes. A real fucking trial, where they're judged by the public, not a group of fucking cops. I very much doubt the person who denied one victim their heart medication will stand trial for attempted murder, even though that would be justice. I imagine we'd have to settle for a lesser sentence, such as criminal negligence or endangerment. Though, to be clear, I am not a lawyer. But that is the only way to actually begin resolving things. Any failure to do so must be taken as a declaration by Joe Farrell and Police Scotland that they are fully committed to terrorising our most vulnerable and placing our members in situations where they are likely to be killed. If that is the option Joe Farrell and Police Scotland opt for, then it falls on us within the trans community to arm ourselves and defend one another by any means necessary. If they intend to continue inflicting violence against us, particularly our children, then we have every fucking right to engage in community defense. And for fuck's sake, get the police out of Pride already. Almost 90% of hate crime victims don't feel safe around them, so stop letting this bigoted gang use what began as a way to reduce the likelihood of police violence as a fucking PR opportunity. You cannot include police at Pride and consider yourself safe and inclusive. Period. So I don't want to fucking hear about how important it is that they take part. Fuck them and fuck their career choice. Trans children actually fucking matter. That is where our duty is as adult members of the community. Protect trans kids. Fuck the injustice system. Though, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the violence caught on camera? What do you think of what Riley and the other victims were put through? What demands would you add to those I've already laid out? Did you notice something I missed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help keep us running, please consider becoming one of the wonderful patrons who make our work possible. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or Super Thanks on YouTube. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Flynn, Bo Ayer, Deborah Goldsmith, Higgins the Seagull, Jackie Sins, Mix Alba, and Peter Cole. And for myself, Edita and Levi, take care now.